nice too.
Yeah. I got it at Marshall's and it's kind of cheap. The things are telling, you know what? I don't give a damn.
I'm sure you don't. You gonna have movies too?
What's that? No movies. But I can take my clothes off and streak if you'd like.
Okay. Wow, what a crowd. Welcome to the Cedarville Area Historical Society presentation of the decade. No. It's great having you here. I'm part of the Historical Society here, and through the summer we do a presentation at least once a month. Our Andy, who's downstairs, he did it he did a great one on Jane Addams and Lincoln's influence on Jane Addams last month. If you got to see that, that's great. If you didn't, you can watch it on our YouTube channel. So same thing with tonight. We're live streaming this on YouTube and Facebook. So if I've got that little camera there. I can zoom it towards you. So if you ask a question, don't let me scare you. You can still ask a question. I don't think I can reach you over there. But yeah, this is so we did that. Tonight we're doing the old settlers picnic that a lot of people have heard about. It's kind of like almost like a state fair or some. I don't want to go too much into it.
I wouldn't go that far.
John Reed was now a resident expert
Huh.
in this subject. And incidentally, usually what happens is we have a program and we gather so much information that then we're able to do a display or an exhibit for it at the next year or a year after or something like that. So it's really good when we have these talks because we do a lot of research and we get facts straight and in order typically. But John Reed he's been a member of the Historical Society for a long time.
Long time.
And we love him. He's always a great orator and does a great job. He's very enthusiastic and can't wait to hear what he has for us tonight. Before I forget, our next one is in September, and you can read about these in our newsletter from if you're not in our mailing list, sign up and we can send it to you, or you can go to our website and download. We have these on there from 2004 all the way up to now, so you can get lots of information on the events that we've done at the museum. But the next one is going to be a fun one. This will be fun too. But September the 16th, it's our Cedarville Historical Spoof video that we did a long time ago. And there are stars sitting here in the audience. And I remastered this because this is almost like Super 8 technology. Those big camcorders you had on your shoulders. So I remastered it so the sound is better. We're going to have a movie night and just have a ball and look at all the people that were in that. And our late President Emeritus Jim Dade. It's a spoof on Cedarville history. So and it's hilarious. Judy's in it. Galen's in it. I was recording, so I'm not in it, but two of my kids are in it. So it's it'll be fun. All right, so don't miss that one.
I have a question.
Yes, Haley.
Will we have to sign autographs after?
You may actually be wearing a costume or disguise so that you can avoid people on the way out. But he actually sang in it, yeah. This is what, 20, it was 20, almost 20 years ago. So, all right. So looking forward to that. Yes, Andy.
tea, birthday tea?
Huh?
I'm going to promo that in my little speech too, yes. The Jane Addams tea, I will talk a little bit about that too.
Yes, John will talk about that tonight. Thank you for bringing that up. Put me on the spot. All right. So, John Reed.
That might be more applause than I get afterwards. Thanks for the billing, Steve. We'll see if I live up to that billing. This building right here is the building that you're sitting in right now. This is the school, the Cedarville School, and I have to admit I went to first and second grade in this building in the 60s. I'm that old. But to start our program tonight, I want you to imagine, I'm going to put you kind of in the way back, like H.G. Wells. And I want you to imagine you're standing anywhere in this area right here, and it's a hot Wednesday in August. In fact, the last Wednesday in 1890. And you're standing there, and you don't know anybody because you've just been transported in. And up this road are horses, people walking, people riding on horses, riding in buggies, riding bicycles, even what they call horse buses. And I'll explain that a little later, but I'll explain it now. A horse bus was probably a lumber wagon with seats on it that carried 20 to 30 people. And they're walking into this area right in here, this road right here with trees. And you're standing there and you're kind of wondering what's going on. And all of a sudden, about noon, up the road comes a really fancy carriage with a top on it. Some pretty impressive people, a guy with a top hat on it. You say to the person standing next to you, who in the world is that person? And they say, well, that's Joseph Filer. He's the governor of Illinois. And you think, what in the world is the governor of Illinois doing in Cedarville, Illinois, a population at the time of 326 people? Well, the guy next to me says it's Old Settlers Day. That's why. Old Settlers Picnic and Reunion. It lasted in Cedarville from 1870 to 1959. I'm just going to get a quick count. Who attended in the 50s? I know there's a couple people here. It is four people that were attending. So we'll talk about the 50s at the end of the program. And I'm going to even ask you for some comments and your remembrances of that. What we're going to talk about is Old Settlers, how it started, a typical Old Settlers meeting. We're going to talk about some of the people that spoke at it. As I researched, I couldn't believe the people that spoke at it. It was just amazing. I talked to a few people on the phone. I talked to Gary Butch Wagner, who grew up in Cedarville in the 50s. He lives in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. I talked to Dee Deanna Kaiser Forrest. She lives in Preston, Illinois now. The last 10 years that Old Settlers in Cedarville, her father and mother Merle and Marion Kaiser owned the grove where it was held. So I tried to get some remembrance of her. I also got a lot of stuff out of the Freeport newspapers. There was the Freeport Journal, the Freeport Bulletin. They were weekly papers, then they became daily papers. The Journal eventually merged with the Standard and eventually bought out the Bulletin, and it is now the Freeport Journal Standard, which I don't know how many people get the Journal Standard. We're the only four fools that get it. I still get it too. But I got a lot of information from you, so that's what we're going to talk about and kind of go through a few things. I'm going to, as I mentioned, I'm also going to throw out some tidbits and some fun things. And if you've got any questions at the end, in fact, if you've got questions during the speech, go ahead and ask me. We'll clear it up right there. So we're just going to start with Stevenson County was first settled by white guys in 1833. William Waddles, Waddles Grove, over by Lena Winslow. 1834, 35, 36 people started kind of pouring into the county. In fact, one of them, Levi Roby, came in 1835, lived near McConnell, and we'll talk a little bit about him, but he was one of the older settlers in Stevenson County. So, how did we get Old Settlers Day? Well, in December of 1869, there were two meetings in Freeport. Prominent people from Freeport, prominent people from Cedarville, all around the county. And this Old Settlers Day was in Cedarville all those years, but it was a Stevenson County thing. It wasn't just the Cedarville thing. They wanted to form an Old Supper Society of Stevens County, so they got together, had these 2 meetings, wrote a constitution, determined, hey, Old Settlers are anybody who was here 1850 and before, so 1833 to 1850. Those were the Old Settlers. They appointed 2 people from each township, 2 people from each ward in Freeport, probably 3 or 4 wards. You were supposed to go out and spread the word. Old settlers, come to a picnic we're going to have. And that was the job of those people to do that. Every year for 67 years, they would elect people to do that. One of the things they decided at that meeting, besides the Constitution, they decided obviously that who the Old Settlers were, and they decided to hold that very first picnic in 1870 in Cedarville. And I think part of the reason is John Adams was one of the men that was at the meeting. He had a lot of money. He owned a grove. This grove right here. And you need a grove if you're going to have a picnic in August. You need a nice shady area. There wasn't any air conditioning in 1870. So they decided in this grove. Prominent people at the meeting, I would mention was Dexter Knowlton, who probably is a great-grandfather of Warren Knowlton, who belongs to our society. O.W. Brewster, I think his claim to fame was he owned the Brewster House, a hotel in Freeport, and that claim to fame was Abe Lincoln stayed there in the 1858 debates. That's where he stayed. John Adams not only owned the mill in Cedarville, he was the president of the Second National Bank in Freeport. And I think if you were here for the presentation by Andy Dvorak, Andy and I were talking about, John Adams was loaded. I think he had dough. I mean, he had a ton of money, which nothing wrong with that. I wish I had that kind of money. But he had a ton of money. Levi Roby, talked about the guy that came in 1835. In fact, he was the first president of the association. And he was the guy that would mention the Freeport. Even in the late 1890s, early 1900s, after he was no longer president, people said they were glad to see Levi Roby, that white-haired Levi Roby, that come up and shake his hand at this meeting. And also a guy, L.W. Guteau, also one of the people that arranged this. He was the vice president of the Second National Bank under John Adams. And I'll answer this question before you ask it. Yes, his son, Charles Guteau, is the guy who shot President James Garfield. So, if you have a question, unfortunately for him, he was dead by that time, so he didn't know. But he was one of the members in there. So, this site right here, Adams Grove, John Adams Grove, later his son, John Weber Adams Grove, was the site of the very first Old Settlers Bank. Take a picture here. You can see this is the plat book from 1874. And right here is our school. Right here is the picnic ground. And you can see it came down. Here's the house in the corner. If you go down the street here, that white house, that was a store, record store. And that property probably went back, I'm guessing, about where that little bridge is at. So that came down quite a ways. And they didn't really describe it. They did say that the grove was just a few rods away from the village. Well, a rod is 16.3 feet, is that correct, Galen? Yep. So maybe 160, 170. So it came down, I think, to where that bridge was at. It really didn't say. It came down that hill. I don't know where they had the stage. I think the stage might have been in this general area. It was almost like an amphitheater. You would sit and look down at it, would be my guess. I guess that's a project. I think the society had the Highland College metal detecting class here, is that correct? Project for them. They got, I think maybe metal detectors should go in here and maybe find some interesting things sometime. So you can see where the picnic grounds were at. I took a few pictures. This is what it looks like now coming up that hill. A lot more trees than what there were in about 1890, 1895. And I walked in the woods, and this is what it looks like there now. Obviously, some of the trees are there, but you didn't have the underbrush. I don't know if animals ran there during the year or not, but obviously it didn't look like this. There were trees, but there had to be places for people to be. And I think when you listen to me, there was a speech, you can't believe the amount of people there. I'm just going to read a brief description of the Freeport paper from 1886. This is about this area right here. murder has for a long time been observed at the beautiful grove of J. Weber Adams. By 1886, John Adams died. His son, J. Weber, owned this. Just a few rods west of the main street of the village. Just a few rods west of the main street of the village, maybe 160, 170 feet in there. The grove is situated in high ground, and a few rods to the north of the speaker stand runs the Willow Stream, the Cedar Creek. So I wonder, by that, we might have had someone in this general area of the stage. But to reach the water from the nearest point, one would have to jump off a large rock and go down almost perpendicularly 100 feet. The distance is so great that one not acquainted with the spot almost becomes dizzy in looking down into the waters of the Cedar as they roll gently on their natural course to the unknown beyond. Lifting the eye from the scene below, which includes the flour mill where many a dinner for a hungry man has been ground, and looking beyond, you see another fortress of mighty rocks, and at one point the opening of a huge cave, which is frequently visited. So they were talking about looking down the creek right here. So you can tell right here was the general area. First reunion, and this is where I get the promo for the Jane Addams mother-daughter, T. The first reunion was held on Tuesday, September 6th, 1870. So, on Saturday, September 6th, 2025, the Cedarville Area Historical Society is going to have a mother-daughter tea in honor of Jane Addams from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock. You're also going to celebrate the 155th anniversary of the very first Old Settlers Day. So you can do a double celebration that day. And we talked when we throw that on the flyer.
John is her 160th birthday also.
Oh, that's right, Jane Addams' 160th birthday, correct? So we got 160th birthday Jane Addams, 155th, or what did I say, 155th of this first one. So a bunch of celebrations going on September 6th.
And Tony will be glad to take your money.
I'm sure she will. So they get your mother and father to know that you can celebrate two different things that day. So it'll be a good deal. That very first reunion, remember, they said old settlers were people that were here 1850 and before. So they had several hundred people in attendance. President Levi Roby, the fellow I talked about from the McConnell area, Wadham's Township, he's near McConnell, called the meeting to order. A prayer was said, the Cedarville choir sang, and they had a band from Monroe to play music. Always allowed music at these, and we'll talk about that. The Old Settlers Association business meeting was held. 3 main items that day. They had written a constitution. A lot of organizations did that because, if you remember, our constitution for the country was written in 1783, so it wasn't that much before. There might have been some people that remember that. I don't know if by 1870 it would have been anybody that far alive, but they understood the importance of the Constitution. They had a Constitution written, but John Adams made a motion to amend the Constitution to allow any resident of Stevenson County to become a member of the Old Settlers Association. They had to sign the Constitution and pay 25 cents. Well, I think what happened was there was some grumbling. A lot of people said, well, I came here in 1851 or 1852. Why can't I get in on the fun? And of course, John Adams, being a businessman, probably had some customers at the bank that said that. So they said, let's let everybody in. And on top of that, they got 25 cents a person, and every organization needs money, whether it was the Old Settlers Association, a business, or the Cedarville Area Historical Society. So you could join for 25 cents, you sign the Constitution. They made the decision to make the picnic last Wednesday in August, which was from 1871 till the 1940s. So it was always the last Wednesday in August, and they decided to pick Cedarville for the following year for 1871. And every year they decide where do we have it, and it was always Cedarville, and we'll talk about it in a little while. A few times Lena tried to push to have it Lena. People from Freeport wanted to have it Freeport, but it always stayed in Cedarville. So they must have been thrilled with Cedarville, I think, because it always had nice groves, and Cedarville's kind of the center of the county. If you take a map of your ruler, the center of the county is kind of closer to Souter Mills, but that's kind of not a straight path to Freeport. So Cedarville's pretty much in the center of the county, and they decided to stay there. Those are 3 order of business. After the business meeting, President Levi Roby was called to speak. He was the oldest settler present. He was the president from 1870 to 1880, continued to attend the meetings for a number of years after 1880. As I talked about, the Freeport papers say, yeah, Levi Roby was there. Everybody was glad to shake that gray-haired gentleman's hand because he was the oldest settler. After the business meeting, more music, and the important thing of the day for most people, dinner. And that was a big feature. At noon, they would spread blankets out. People brought picnic lunches. There was no concession stand there yet. Eventually there would be, but at first you brought your own dinner. They spread blankets on there. A gentleman from Cedarville in the 1950s, Sam Frank, recalled that at times there were so many people at these reunions, there was hardly enough space for everybody to spread out their blanket. But that's how you ate, just through the blanket. There were no tables, there were no benches at this early meeting, there were no seats. There was a stage and that was it. You ate dinner. After dinner, old settlers were called on to make speeches. I'm sure some of the guys knew they were going to be speaking, but they also would ask people, they'd say, Joe Smith, would you speak? He'd stand up, he'd talk 10 to 20 minutes about what it was like in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s, the good things, the bad things. Occasionally someone would say, I don't want to speak. But they just asked old settlers to speak, and as I mentioned, most speeches were 10 to 20 minutes. One of the papers chastised one of the speakers in 1876. One guy got up and spoke for 2 hours. Yeah, I know. I'm sure you're thinking, when's this guy going to shout? And the paper did say it was an interesting speech, but the next week in the paper, at that time, and there weren't any bylines. I don't think there were any bylines in the paper like the 20s. It was probably an editor or publisher, but they took it to task and they said it was a good speech, but nobody should be speaking 2 hours at something like this. And apparently the guy, I can't remember his name, but he didn't like it because he wrote a letter to the editor the next week to say I had a lot to say, but they didn't agree. So no more 2-hour speeches. It was an awful long time. But that was the basic format of the 70s. So from 1870 through about 1880, you had your business meeting, then you had dinner, and then old settlers would get up and speak, and they talk about things. I'm sure some guys spoke every year. They always have music there, have a band there, and things like that. So let me just move on here a little bit. So getting to about the 1880s, and of course, I should have mentioned earlier, one of the things I'm also going to talk about is, like life and the country, the old settlers, they changed over the years. Didn't change at first. This is from 1908. I'm going to show you this full poster in a little bit. What I want to concentrate on is for the next 40, 50 years, this was the basic program right here. At 10 o'clock, they call to order music by someone, in this case, this is 1908, it was the Winslow Band. They'd have a prayer. They'd have a welcome address. They'd have a response. And if we have time, I might read a little bit of one from 1935. Basically, the Old Settlers Association, somebody would speak and welcome the old settlers and say, we're glad to have you here. We know you did a lot of things, good things, and this is how we got to where we are now in this time because of you. And then an old settler would respond. They'd have different speakers over the years. And if you looked at the speakers, they started out as giving a welcome address or a response, and then later those guys kind of moved up into the organization. I think it was kind of a training element. Every year, they would speak. Then you have reading of the minutes, the treasurer's report, and elections of officers. Now also, in that reading of the minutes and treasurer's report, they did something for the first time I saw in 1879. They had an obituary report. They literally would read the names of all the old settlers in the organization who died that year. And they would basically read that, and it would put it in the paper, and it looked something like this. They might say, oh, right here. M.A. Cook of Orangeville died September 11th, born in the county, always lived in the county, native of Illinois. H. Woodmans in Freeport died September 21st, born in 1836, came to the county in 1866, native of Ohio. And if you read over here, and I didn't know we couldn't get this this out. Tell me if I'm in the way here. I was just looking at this tonight. It says here, Mungo's passed away. The last meeting of the association were H. Woodmansey, F.W. Hafer, two of the leading and pioneer manufacturers of the county. If I'm not mistaken, Woodmansey and Freeport made windmills, correct? Anybody know? Yeah.
Windmills and water pumps.
Windmills and water pumps. That was apparently, that was the original Woodmansey right there. And he died in 1960. They have this in the paper every year. Now, some years, there were a few years where like 400 old settlers died. They just said, hey, 400 old settlers died. They didn't read the whole page. But they would read this, and I think they probably this would be in all the newspapers, probably about a 40 or 50 year period. Every year, they list the old settlers. They tell the history. They told what happened. They died, where they came from. And so that was our obituary report. And the funny thing is, before the meeting, I was talking with Lisa Goodwin, where you at? He said, raise your hand right there. And I called the Stevenson County Historical Society, and I asked them, do you guys have, would somebody have donated all the papers from the association, minutes of the meeting and all that? The lady said, so-and-so knows, and I'll have you call me back. Now that was in June. I haven't gotten a call yet. But, so I don't know where those at, but I was out here tonight kind of fiddling around, looking at some books in our library out here, looking at the Cedarville Fire Department book. I looked and something almost hit me in the nose. We do have obituary record of Old Settlers Association out here, and you can see it's handwritten, and it says the same thing. Mrs. John Timberlake, can't even read the writing. It tells what happened, or how old she was, a resident of such and such. So we have these out here. I was really surprised. So if you're interested in reading all the old obituaries, here they are, and we have them on here. I was kind of surprised, but I looked around and almost punched me in the nose out there and said, there it is. But those were in the paper. They'd be in the paper every year. So they would read that every year. And of course, we talked about music. And I just wrote down a few of these over the years. You can see the very first one, the Monroe Band. Cedarville had a number of bands. The Cornet Band, the Independent Band, Cedar Cliff Band on the Clint Fink. Anybody know Clint Fink? I'm assuming that would have been Corinne Howard, some relation to Corinne Howard. I would guess she was a Fink. He ran the band for like 30 years. The National Band, Orangeville, had a band, McConnell Grove, Buckeye, Pearl City, Lena, Winslow, Freeport. They had the Henny Globe Band. W.T. Rawling, the company had a band. Choirs, the Cedarville Glee Club. In the 40s, the 4-H rural youth team would sing. They always had music. Always had music here. And in fact, one little thing I'm going to talk about, in 1883, well, by the way, McConnell Grove. I was at the McConnell Museum a couple weeks ago. It's an interesting place. Been to the Winslow one also. The original name of McConnell was McConnell's Grove. Apparently, when the railroad came through, they said, we got to have something short of that. So it got shortened to McConnell. So that's why it says McConnell. We've got a little tidbit. If you're interested in McConnell, it was McConnell's Grove, now it's McConnell. 1883. Over 3,000 people in attendance. Really big crowd. And again, these are estimates. And it's funny, when I read the crowd sizes, the Freeport Journal maybe would say 3,000. The Freeport Bulletin might say 4,000. So there were estimates, and each paper would have a different estimate. But they also had, interesting, they had a tidbit counter one year. We kind of went throughout some of the tidbits here. They had, where was it here? Oh, in 1883, they had 6 bands there. And they were playing all day. And if you notice here, it says at times several bands would be playing at the same time, and it was a source of music to those in attendance to see the boys vie with each other. Now, back in the 1970s and 80s, I never went to them, but they used to have rock concerts where they had 5 or 6 bands. They called them the Battle of the Bands. We had a Battle of the Bands at Old Settlers Day in 1883. They had so many bands there. It was just kind of fun to read some of the things in here. This is from the Freeport paper, I think this was from the Bulletin. Eurus, I think Kyle, had a bus load out and in, and he made good time both ways. He had that horse bus. I'm assuming it was an old lumber wagon. They put boards on it. They might have 20 people in it. They go back and forth to Freeport, big Freeport people from Freeport out on that bus. And you know, I never knew what a horse bus was. But I did find something interesting. I'm going to read this quick. From 1883. 1883, the annual, this is from the Daily Journal. The annual meeting of the Old Settlers Association of Stephen County is being held on the Adams Ground at Cedarville. A telephone dispatch from the Journal, Journal and Republican representative states there is an immense throng of old settlers living on the ground. 1883, apparently, we have telephones in Cedarville. As they mentioned in 1884 also, the representative from the newspaper called up, and it was an afternoon paper, called the paper and said, hey, the crowds are getting bigger. So we had telephones here in 1883 or 1884, so it's kind of an interesting fact we found. 1884, this one from the Treasurer's Report. The balance in 1883 was $21.72. They spent $9.99. They had a balance of $11.73. In 1885, they had $1.29 on payment. They asked people in the crowd was 4,000 to 5,000 people. They asked them to contribute because they paid for things that they gave the bands money, and they had posters like this right here, and other little odds and ends. How much money do you think they collected from 4,000 to 5,000 people? Anybody want to venture a guess? Somebody give me a guess here.
600.
How much?
600.
600.
400.
400. Well, you're closer, $20. Yeah. There just wasn't much money there. Of course, things didn't come. They need 4,000 to 5,000 people contributed $20. It's kind of amazing when you think about it. But yet they had just as much fun as if they just got $600 or $400. Yeah. So, and the things are changing. In 1887, the Freeport Bulletin reported that booths were selling ice cream, lemonade, peanuts, fruit. Water was scarce. You could go down to the creek. If not, you could walk. The hotel was across the street. The hotel was across the street from where Jim and Sharon Barmore lived, where Phil Foltz lives. That was the hotel. People would walk down there and get water. If not, they had lemonade there. I suspect people would walk their own water. But it never was important. I guess you could go down to Cedar Creek and drink out there. Probably much safer in 1887 than what it is now. So starting in 1890 and continuing for the next 30 to 35 years, I can't believe it when I started reading about the attendance at some of these old settler days, and also the prominent speakers. And I should have mentioned, maybe go back here a few. Now my thing's not working. Oh wait.
Want to go backwards?
Go backwards. Okay, we'll go the other way. Let me stop on this right here. At 2 o'clock, and I call this 2 o'clock, the 2 o'clock speech was the big speech. Okay, you can go forward now. At 2 o'clock, they had the big speaker. And from 1890 to about 1915, I couldn't believe who was speaking here. 1890, I talked about, we were in the time machine. Governor Joseph Feiler was out here speaking. 1892, John Altgeld, Andy Dvorak talked about him in the speech a month ago. He was running for governor of Illinois. He won. He was a very progressive person. He won that of the governorship that year. He spoke to a reported crowd of 10,000 people. Think about it. When you go home tonight, take a look to your left, you go downhill, supposedly 10,000 people were in that room. It's almost hard to believe. And of course, 10,000 people meant a lot of horses, a lot of buggies, and I don't know what they did with all the waste, but I guess that's not the program. No, but you think about it, and the amazing thing is, most of these 2 o'clock speakers reasons. Now talk about more of them. They talked about John Alkel, and the comments in the paper were, he wasn't hard to understand, but he was kind of forceful when he spoke, but they were surprised. He did not make it a political speech. Most of these speakers, when they came, they talked about the old settlers. Governor Pfeiffer talked about, he had come from Virginia. He kind of compared Illinois, when he got here, to what Virginia was like when he left. John Alfield had a very prepared speech. He talked about the old settlers, the good things they did, how they helped our country grow and made contributions. They didn't make political speeches. But they were smart enough, when you think about it, for a politician, there was no radio, no TV. He got to speak in front of 10,000 people. I don't know how many of them voted for him in Stevenson County. But the fact is, he got to speak in front of a lot of people and made a pretty good impression because he made a political speech. People were pretty surprised. Some of them voted for him. Some of the men voted for him, obviously, in 1890 because the women weren't voting. And he came here and spoke and took advantage of old settlers' days. All through the 90s, crowds were reported to be over 4,000 plus every year. Think about it, 4,000 people and more, 8, 7, 8, 9, 10,000. Cedarville's population in 1890 was 326 people. In 1900, it was 377 people. 10,000 people in a town of 350 people. It's amazing when you think about it. Just think of the traffic. Have to be a traffic jam going out at about 3:30. Yeah, exactly. Kind of amazing. I was just baffled when I heard that. So by 1890, some of the thousands of people were really happy because they started providing bicycles. The paper pointed out that's progress. We're getting away from horses. We now have bicycles. 1897, the Treasurer's Report, they collected on the ground $41.47. They gave the Cedar Cliff Band $20. Lumber, water, and printing cost them $21.47. So they didn't have any money. So in 1898, I don't know if this is going to work. Can you go bounce ahead here? In 1898, and for a number of years, they sold these ribbons. Now this is from 1901. They started selling these, and it had a pin on the back, and you pin it on here. And they sold ribbons. I don't know how much they charged. It was a way to fundraise. People collected these. If you've ever seen pictures on either TV or books of old Civil War reunions, you'd see those guys standing there, and they have the same type of thing. That was the collectible in the 1890s, early 1900s. In the 1980s and 90s, I know a lot of girls softball teams did a little pin collection. They collect them and trade the pins and that kind of stuff. No, people collected these. We have a collection there. In fact, I believe this is the 1901 collection right here. So, Wendy put this up. Wendy Gilpin put it up here. So if you want to see the real thing, it's right over here. But they did that not as much as a collectible, as much as a fundraiser. And needed some cash. There wasn't a matter of trying to make money. It was just a matter of just enough money to keep going. 1900, the last year that the reunion was over here at Adams Grove. Trees were dying. As we talked about, if you're going to have a picnic the last Wednesday in August, you need some trees. You need some shade. So, the next year, 1901, they moved old settlers northeast of Cedarville. Now it's north of Cedarville. Right here, they were actually was Miss Eliza Klingman's Grove, but it was later bought by George Worth. This is actually where Highway 26 would be. The old highway went down here past the Jane Adams house, across the meadow, and actually came up behind. If you're familiar with that, when you go across the bridge, that big house on the left, if you can see it, it went behind that house and actually connected up at the corner where Elm and Angle were. That's where they moved it to, George, and it came down quite a ways. In fact, can you go to the next slide, Steve? I took a picture. This is just about Elm and Angle, and way down here would probably be about the drive to where John Adams. This whole area right in here was that fourth grove, the Liza Kingman Grove, Clinton Grove. Go to the next slide. This is sitting in a driveway, Warren Zundall's driveway. Here's 26. If you ever drive up here, the poles follow the old road. You can see a path right down here. So in this area right in here is where the old settlers moved their picnic grounds to. In fact, it says here, right on this, the 39th angle, this is Lincoln, was moved 1/4 of a mile northeast of Cedarville. At the time, can you go back one, Steve? One more. You can tell at the time, it was northeast of Cedarville. The majority of Cedarville was less than what is now 26. And it was actually more there. Some people had to go through Cedarville, across Cedar Creek, right down here, across Cedar Creek, up behind the house, and this was where the new old settlers was at. And I think if you drive up this road, there are a couple new houses in here. Dave Kaiser lived there. I think maybe that's kind of the general, if you're familiar with that on 26, that is kind of the general area of where the second old settlers was moved to. And go to the next two, okay, we'll stop there for a second. Between 1900 and 1910, the 2 o'clock speakers, the big speakers, after the meeting, after the music, after dinner, from 1900 to 1910 in 04, a U.S. Senator from Illinois, Shelby Coleman, 05, a U.S. Senator from Illinois, A.J. Hopkins, and in 07, a former U.S. Senator, William Mason. In 4 years, Cedarville, Illinois had the U.S. Senator from Illinois speaking here. It's almost hard to believe. I don't know now. I don't know if Tammy Duckworth or Dick Durbin even know where Cedarville, Illinois is at. No, I'm not knocking that. I mean, but yeah, in that period, those guys came. Obviously, they had an audience of anywhere from 6,000 to 8,000. No radio, no TV. So it was a good opportunity to speak. Okay, go to the next one. We'll go to this poster right here. 1908. Frank Loudon. How many people have heard of Loudon State Park in Oregon? Yeah. Where Black Rock statue's at? Frank Loudon lived in the Oregon area. He came from Chicago. He was our U.S. representative. He came and spoke. He later became the governor of Illinois. In the 20s, he went to the Republican National Convention as a possible presidential candidate. Never made it. But he was the governor of Illinois. As I mentioned, he ran for president. In 1908, it's kind of interesting. August 26th, on Wednesday, he spoke here in Cedarville to maybe 5,000 to 6,000 people. The next day, he went to Freeport, and he was a part of the 50th anniversary of the Lincoln Douglas days. The debate in 1908 was the 50th year anniversary. In fact, found an interesting little thing in the Freeport paper. Find the script, page 29. It said here, this was the Daily Journal. We've expressed the opinion, this is on August 8th, so this is 2 weeks before this and 2 weeks before the Lincoln Douglas 50th anniversary. We have expressed the opinion that there ought not to be any free band concert on Freeport on August 26th, or any entertainment that would conflict in any way with the old settlers meeting that day in Cedarville. Of course, a band concert in Freeport would not interrupt the old settlers meeting 6 miles away, but is liable to be resented by the people of the county and do great damage to the businessmen of Freeport. The Freeport businessmen cannot afford to be put in a position where prejudice would be created against them. So they were thinking about making some money and losing some money. They didn't want to have a band concert, even though they had the 50th anniversary, because old settlers was that big and that popular. And by the way, we talked about John Altgeld speaking here. He was a progressive. I think what he refused to send, I'm going to ask Andy where he refused to send the National Guard in for the Pullman strikers. Was that what he, in 1894. He wouldn't break up the Pullman strike.
He also pardoned most of the remaining Haymarket.
Right. So he's a pretty progressive guy, right? And he, you know, I guess maybe he spoke in Cedarville in 1892. Frank Loudon spoke here in 1908. And of course, we talked about the Pullman strike, George Pullman, Pullman cars. I'll give you one guess who Frank Loudon's wife was. The daughter of George Pullman. So kind of a deja vu, but he was married to George Pullman's daughter. So, next picture, please. Kind of brown, there we go. Kind of a handsome looking guy. You know, when I was doing this research, found out a lot of stuff, and I thought I knew something about Freeport history. I mean, I've heard of John Henney, who started in Cedarville, and then Henney Motor Works, W.T. Raleigh, Dr. Creighton Park, Oscar Taylor, the Taylor home of the Stevenson County Historical Society's at, Taylor Park, F.A. Reed, Reed Park, and the clothing store, people like that. This guy right here, you know, in my time, I hate to admit it, I'm old now, but I thought it was a big deal. In the 90s, I got to go in the locker room for the Chicago Bulls, and I met Michael Jordan. I've been to a few, I thought, wow, that's kind of a big deal. This fellow right here, Smith D. Atkins. Never heard of him before I started researching this. Kind of an interesting guy, and I think he's the reason why all these really prominent speakers were in Freeport. This guy came to the Freeport area in 1846, lived on a farm, decided that he wanted to get in the newspaper business. So he worked for the Prairie Democrat, first paper in Freeport. In 1852 or so, he went to Mount Morris Seminary. And it was a college. He studied things about journalism and printing the paper. And he and his brother and another guy, the father, bought the Mount Morris paper and the Savannah paper, started that. But he decided in the mid-1850s he wanted to be a lawyer. Well, back then, you studied with a lawyer, took the bar exam, became a lawyer. About 1855, 1856, admitted to the bar, started practicing in Freeport, became they called it the district attorney, and it wasn't just the Stevenson County, it was like Joe Davis, like 2 or 3 counties, but he was the district attorney. So I guarantee you, he was a Republican. So in 1858, Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas came to Freeport, right? Well, he's a lawyer, he's a district attorney. If I'm a betting man, he at least got to shake Abraham Lincoln's hand. Probably have a chance to meet him, right? That's pretty cool. The thing, I hate to admit it, it kind of trumps me being Michael Jordan. In 1860 or 61, he was in court. The Civil War broke out. He left a trial in the middle. Was the first man in Stevenson County to enlist. Formed a regiment for the Civil War, took him to Springfield to the Illinois Armory, and of course regiments back then came from local areas. You all went together and marched down there. They elected him their captain. He fought with U.S. Grant at Fort Donelson in Tennessee. He was in the March to the Sea with General William Sherman. Now, he was an officer. I don't know if he actually personally met Grant and personally met Sherman, but I bet he was around him because he was an officer, certainly in some meetings. So he was in the March to the Sea, and of course, they marched from Atlanta to Savannah, Georgia. Then they turned around and went north through the Carolinas. Well, he was in charge of his regiment in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and he went to visit the president of the University of North Carolina, who had been the former governor of North Carolina, and they were talking about history. The governor, or excuse me, the president of North Carolina University said, had his daughter bring a book in, and 4 months later, Smith D. Atkins was married to this girl. Brought her back to Freeport. But right before Civil War was over, Lincoln signed a paper and made him a general. Now, not a top general, but he was a general. So for the rest of his life, he was General Smith D. Atkins. He came back to Freeport, was the postmaster for 25 years, was the editor of what turned into the Freeport Journal-Standard, and obviously was involved in Republican politics. 1903, Teddy Roosevelt came to inaugurate a statue of Lincoln in Taylor Park. I guarantee you this guy was right there. When Senator Sherman came, or Senator Coleman came rather, in 04, he met him. They were talking about politics in the paper. Teddy Roosevelt came back in 1910 to Freeport to make a speech. So this guy met Lincoln. He met Teddy Roosevelt. He was underneath William Sherman and General Grant. So I think he trumped me as far as Michael Jordan. And I never heard of this guy before. And he was a prominent man in the Old Settlers Association. He was a newspaper member. I suspect that's how the Old Settlers Association got those really prominent U.S. senators. I mean, really did a fantastic job. So we're going to move along here. We're kind of losing time. 1910s, we saw changes all through the 10s, except for the bank accounts. By 1919, the balance was $97.99. They were bringing income in from concession stands. People didn't have to bring their lunch if they didn't want to. You had food there. 1913, another U.S. senator, Lawrence Sherman, was supposed to speak but had to cancel in August because he had to stay in Washington. Maybe they had a situation like they do now and had to stay there and do his work, but he's a pretty smart politician because in 1950 he came and spoke. He wanted to take advantage of the crowds of 6,000 or 7,000 people. In 1916, the Old Settler made its third and final move. Could you go to the next? If you're familiar, Highway 26, this is the little gazebo in the middle of town on 26. This is the third and final place of Old Settlers Days. Yeah, go to the next page too. I kind of took a couple extra pictures. This is straight on. You can see houses at the time. This house right here in the corner, the White House up in the other corner, the only two buildings. There are no other houses in here. It's one big row. It was owned by a fellow named Elder Yeagle. I thought maybe just they meant because he's old, but they always said Elder, so I'm assuming that was his first name. It was even mentioned that he offered this. He was a member, and he offered this to the Old Settlers. And it was mentioned in an article about Cedarville that, boy, this would be a good deal because Cedarville could use this for other stuff. And I know I read where Cedarville had 4th of July celebrations here. They had, in 1951, I know this because the Stevenson County Fair was rained out at Taylor Park, and my mother showed cows here for the 4-H. So they had the 4-H show right in this grove in 1950. So they did other things, but this was the home for Old Settlers from 1916 on. Mentioned in the paper by 1917, automobiles were outnumbering horses. Old times were changing. 20s and 30s, it saw even greater changes, but still the same idea. Old settlers would get together to see each other. 1921, there were 480 cars, 390 people, 3,900 people at a lunch stand. In the 20s, a couple times attendance was down because there was harvesting and threshing. In 1927, they were disappointed. They had the Trash Bridge picnic, which is over by Rock. Everybody's familiar with going on Highway 70, and that they had the same exact day, and that kind of hurts all the attendance. To kind of get things going and get things changing, they added events in the 20s. They had horseshoe pitching, races for boys and girls, and men and women, different things. Some baseball games. They had dances afterwards at Scrooms Hall at night. So, and of course you could do that because we now have cars. People didn't have to come from all over the county on horses. In 1928, they only had 200 people because it rained, just at the business meeting. But in 32, 5,000 people came back, most had said in many years, and they talked about the fact, we don't think about this, they recognized the Civil War veterans. And it was only, 50, 60 years from there, and those guys were getting old, there were still Civil War veterans around in 1932. Pop it up here. Okay, 1938. As you can see, things have changed a little bit. We still have a prayer, a welcome, a response,
By the way, this guy was the founding superintendent of schools for about 30, 35 years down in Fisker. Treasurer's report, reading of the minutes, reports of the obituary secretary, election of officers, adjournment for dinner, band concert, 1 to 2 o'clock, the annual address. T. Barney Thompson was the editor of the Rockford papers. Okay, that program readings. Oh, short addresses, the people they call off the audience. Same thing they were doing in 1870. They'd call an old settler to fill time and he'd get up and talk. And they said members of the Grand Army of the Republic meet with us and take part in the program. So that's what they did. But you notice over here, they also included an athletic program. Oh, by the way, there were amplifiers on the ground too. But you had instrumental music, songs, music, reading, song. People came and did things. They had different people doing that. They had foot races, things. They tried to keep people interested. I mean, let's face it, even in 1870, when they just had speeches, you didn't listen to every speech. And if you had a 10-year-old kid with you, they were probably back over here playing in the grove. But, so they said, hey, to make this interesting, we've got to add a few things. As you can see, in 1938, they started adding a few things. In 1939, there was a 70th reunion. They had 150 people over 70. They had 150 people over 66, I would be in that. They listed them all in Freeport paper. One of them they listed was William Perriott. He was 81 from Buckeye Township. He had attended all 70 reunions. Mrs. John Henny was in attendance. They noted that in the Freeport paper. 1941, Robert Lowy purchased that grove from Elder Yeagle. He now owned it. 1942, there was an article in the paper. A fellow named James Wolmer from Redwood. Anybody know that name? I don't recognize it. James Wolmer from Redwood. He kept up a tradition. He had driven his buggy for 50 years. He just kept driving the buggy. Everybody else was coming in the car. He'd hitch up his team over at Meadow, drive the buggy, go to the settlers' day to keep up the tradition. 43 and 44, World War II canceled Old Settlers. And in 45, they were all set to go with Old Settlers. And remember, 45 and 46, and I don't remember it obviously, but some old people, the polio epidemic. And 2 weeks before Old Settlers, they canceled. In fact, the president, Stephen Ridley, wrote a letter to the Freeport paper and said, we're going to follow what the Stevenson County Health Department said. Other organizations had things going on, but Old Settlers said, no, we're calling off because of the polio problem. And probably going to. Okay, let's go to 1947. One more. Okay, 1947. A new change. Of course, they haven't had Old Settlers for 4 years. 1947, we have electricity, we have lights. You notice now, Old Settlers, even though it's the last Wednesday, it's now longer than the last Wednesday in August. It got moved earlier. I don't know why. I suspect maybe to avoid the Stevenson County Fair, but I'm not really sure. It doesn't say. But they moved it from the afternoon to the evening. It doesn't start at 10 o'clock in the morning anymore. In the afternoon, obviously, the same program. Dress, response, treasurer's report, reading the minutes, obituary report, election of officers, some music, music, and they had music tonight. And they had motion pictures. There was something else that they did. Did anybody else know anything else than this? You probably wouldn't do nowadays. You probably wouldn't want to spray DDT with it. I'm sure that was probably telling people that, hey, we're not going to have mosquitoes there. We're going to kill them with DDT. But I noticed that they had sprayed DDT, now it's right on there. But they changed, so things were changing. You know, it was no longer just that day pick, it was day and night. When it first started, it was a lot of rural people. They did their chores, they came, they went home by 6 o'clock, they did their night chores. Well, by 1947, number one, you could get there faster in a car. And people worked in factories, people worked in offices, so they switched where they went the afternoon and the evening. He still had a speaker. I think Senator Edward Laughlin, I can't remember him from Freeport. He was an Illinois senator. And by this time, the speakers were not U.S. senators. They were Illinois state senators, judges, Illinois assemblymen. It's still pretty impressive, but not like a U.S. senator. And I do have to mention one thing. In 1948, the next year, I talked about last year at my speech about gas stations. My dad always remembers. He says, I remember when my dad opened our station, he said they had a dance in there before all the equipment was in there. But he couldn't remember when. Well, I know when it was. It was August 4th, because the night of the Old Settlers Day, they had a team dance in our station. So I know the date now, August 4th, 1948, just by researching it. So I did find something personal on this. Okay. I had some remembrances, and I talked to a few people. Gary Wagner. Is Butch Wagner on here with us? Steve?
Is he here?
No, is he on the screen? Is he listening here?
Oh no, I don't see him.
Okay, well, Butch is from Cedarville originally, and I called him, and I got some remembrance from him. He talked about lights being strung up all over the grove, so you could see it on every light. And I remember when a kid, there was a building in the middle of the grove. Can you go back a couple? All right, Steve, can you go back a couple? Keep going. Okay, yeah, about where this brown house is at, maybe on the side of this brown house, Sally Kreider Anderson lived right here. Somewhere out, maybe on the back side of this brown house, there was a building. I remember as a kid, I'd go in, this is the 60s, and look in the window. There was a pop machine in there. It was one of those old style pop machines where you immersed the pop in the cold water. I just thought it was a concession stand and storage area. Butch Wagner told me, I guess you guys can verify, the north side of that building swung up, and they enclosed them on that became the stage. I didn't realize that. I don't know if that's true, and I guess, but he told me, so I'm going to believe Butch. So they used that as the stage. So one part of the building actually swung up, that became the stage. I talked to Dee Dee Forrest, who's Dee Dee Kaiser Forrest. Her mother and father, Merle and Marion Kaiser, owned this grove. And full disclosure, she's my mom's first cousin. And her uncle, Dwight Kaiser, and then Mary Mills, kind of the unofficial historian of Cedarville. She told us how they stored wood planks in that building, and they pulled them out, they put up cinder blocks or cement blocks, and that's what the seats were. And they stored the planks in there, and that's what they used for seating around the stage. As I mentioned, in 49, Merle Kaiser bought this from Robert Lloyd, and he had it through the last 2 years. In 49, they did it in conjunction with Cedarville's 100th anniversary. It was kind of a combination of settlers, Cedarville's 100th anniversary. It was held on Saturday, all day on Saturday. In the 50s, they moved it to Friday night and Saturday. So obviously things were changing. You know, you get more people every Saturday, a lot of people didn't work on Saturday. But one of the things Butch remembered, they had a rodeo. About right in this area right here, in the early 50s, they held a rodeo. They were doing different things to try and draw people. It was becoming more of a Cedarville, Red Oak, Saddler Mills, Orangeville thing than a county-wide thing. Can I have one slide up there, Steve? Keep going. I want to mention this guy. 1952, John Frank, picture turned out pretty good. I didn't want to mention this. He was 93 years old. He had attended every reunion. It was amazing. He'd been there, he was a year older than Jane Addams. He had gone to every reunion he recalled, and all three of them, Fourth Grove, the grove across from Cedarville School, and this new grove. So we have positive proof that there are only three spots. Butch Wagner talked about having a Ferris wheel there, Tilda World. He talked about some carnival games. Carnival games there. Butch mentioned there was a milk bottle game where you put milk bottles and you threw balls at it, right? Well, apparently one year the guy that was doing it wanted to take a nap, so he asked Butch to run for him. Butch quickly discovered the trick to it was the bottles on the bottom were filled with lead. You can knock them over. So Butch switched around with them on top. He got his friend Wimp the cops to come, and the next thing you know, the guy was on prizes because they were knocking all the things down. You didn't want to have Butch watching the bottle. And the American Legion had a concession stand on Butch worked it. Dee Dee Kaiser remembered that her dad, Merle Kaiser, told her not to play carnival games because they were rigged, which Wagner just figured that out. They were rigged. And she recalled that after Old Settlers Day, people would come to the Grove and ask Merle if they could take their metal detectors and go around the Grove. So, pony shows, they had those in 1958, horse shows. Firemen had water fights in the 50s. Panel shows on the stage, anything to try and draw people there. It had changed quite a bit. 1959 turned out to be the last Old Settlers Day. Don't know why it quit, they didn't say. I do know this, that my sister, Kathy, was about 5'1", first place in the costume contest. I do know that, I got to throw the family out there. In 1960, Stevenson County Historical Society, I found an article, invited the Cedarville residents to a program on Jane Addams in Freeport, because it said there was no Old Settlers Day. 61, 62, I searched. So as far as my research goes, 1959 was the last year of Old Settlers. In 76 and 77, they had a bicentennial celebration in Cedarville. They called it Old Settlers, I think, because the old timers tried to tie it to it, it just didn't fly. The real Old Settlers Day last year was 1959. So, again, before we go on, I'm going to ask I got one little thing to read and we'll get done here. I'm sure you're tired of hearing me. But I've got to say before, one more reminder, the Cedarville Historical Society, Jane Addams Tea, is Saturday, September 6th from 1 to 3. It's also the 155th anniversary of the first Old Settlers Day. And when we go to questions and comments, I've got a few people that were here. Don't be afraid to comment. You know, the Old Settlers Days, even though they changed in the 40s and 50s with all the stuff you're talking about, they really were about getting together and getting the old people together and getting together each year. So I'm going to read this editorial. This is from the Freeport paper in 1942. And even with all the changes, I think this kind of nailed Old Settlers. August 20th, 1942, the Freeport Journal-Standard. It said, Old Settlers Day is probably the only purely local holiday in the Stevenson County calendar. It is a tradition that reaches far back into the 19th century when many of the original settlers were accustomed to attend. It is a celebration without taint of commercialism. It is not even held to boom Cedarville or the county or even for political purposes. There have been speakers of the day from both parties and from this congressional district as well as the great world beyond. Among all customs, it is perhaps the one that has undergone the least change. Of course, the arrival of the motor age and cement highways was something of a revolution, so far as Old Settlers days were concerned. Plenty of Freeporters in their middle years can recall the dusty trek to Cedarville behind a perspiring horse routine in a Surrey top buggy, Phaeton, or one of those livery stable wagonettes in which the picnickers sat on hard seats facing one another and thought it was a treat. Bump, bump, bump went the long caravans up the limestone steps that were a feature of the trip. The road really went over the Cedarville Bridge in those days too, and then wound through the flatlands north of the river, past the Horsegain Forest and by the slough. Slough and Horsegain are still there, but you go by too fast to notice them, even at 40 miles an hour. It's different now, but when you get to the grounds, there is not so much that's different, except for the loudspeakers, which work better some years than others. The picnickers still mill about during the principal address of the day. The kids tumble around and squawk. Greetings are exchanged, acquaintances are renewed, and the officers sit on the platform and go through the same routine as their grandfathers did. It would be too bad if Old Settlers Day ever got itself streamlined. There ought to be a few things that stay put. And I think this editorial, even though things change, I think this really nailed what Old Settlers was about. and it was written 18 years before the end. So, Old Settlers Day, 1870, 1959. I thank you for your kind attention. I'm sure it was a bit long-winded, but if you have any questions or comments, or you will attend Old Settlers Day, feel free to, at this time, tell us a little bit about it. Do you have any questions or comments? Don't be shy.
I live right across from the last place they had, and I had a thing, it's probably been 6, 7 years ago. I was standing there at my front door, looking that direction, and all of a sudden, I was picturing that thing happening over there. There were cars, there was a lunch stand, a table that looked like it was a lunch stand, boards up on sawhorses and stuff, people milling around, and it just all came in my mind. I mean, I'm just standing there looking at it, just all of a sudden, it just all hit me.
It's almost hard to believe, is it correct?
No, it was just,
I've got a color picture of my sister standing in line, and you can see across the road, you can see cars on the road lined up there. They did mention one time to come in from east and west, not to clog up the highway, come in from the east or west side of Cedarville. The cars had to be all over. Before that, horses had to be all over, the original old settlers across here. I mean, I can't imagine where they put the horses. You know, when you think about it, where in the world they did mention one time they didn't want you to tie the horses up to the trees over there, so it was on the trees. I mean, it's just amazing. Are there any more remembrances of old settlers? Go ahead.
Well, I was looking forward to this because I remember my aunt saying, you know, 2 blocks up the street, there used to be an old settlers meeting, and all the things that are going on. And I wish it was still going on, because then I come along later, and maybe I could have went to it too. I just think it's so neat that 2 blocks up the street, there was this big festival, and my aunt used to talk about it, because see, I thought that my aunt, my dad's older sister, Sarah Manor, my grandmother, Mary Manor, moved into this house. They moved out from the farm that was 3 miles north of Cedarville, Arista. And they moved in, I thought, the late 1950s, and she used to talk about the goings on of this, you know, old settlers meeting. I used to think it was so neat. I was looking forward to your, seminar of telling about the history. I didn't know thousands and thousands of people came to Cedarville, and that was interesting. I still wish it was going on.
I was surprised by that many people too, to be honest with you. I mean, when I started reading about it, that we had that many people here in Cedarville. What's really amazing is that many people came by horse and buggy. I mean, that's the amazing. I mean, I understand if you get in your car, it's pretty easy to do, but people, and maybe talk at the start, it was a Stevenson County thing. Every township in the county was represented. And, you know, if you think about it, Lauren and Kent are kind of a pain in the butt to get to by car. You've been to Lauren and Kent. Can't imagine what it was like riding a horse or a buggy to get here. Because there were no, I imagine probably 20, 26, and 75 were the only cement roads in the 50s. I mean, and before that, probably in the 20s, they mentioned the 20s, I don't know when they submitted Highway 26, but maybe it was in the 30s. But before that, Freeport to Cedarville was a dirt road. And all the other roads coming in. So it is amazing how many people here. Any other comments? Arna?
Yes, I went to school here in this building for grades 1 through 6. Didn't have kindergarten back then. But I remember Old Settlers vividly for probably 10 years, maybe more than that. But talking about that building in Kaiser Grove, that old building, yes, I agree with Dee Dee. The signs came down for the stage, but also during the summer, they would not take those signs down. They would, I don't know if they hung a sheet like you do here or what they did. I don't think they had a projector.
And had movies.
And they had 3 movies. I don't know if it was a Friday night. I don't remember. But then they sold popcorn and things. But yes, Mom Pop Cat. is the Grove, and then I have pictures of they in a parade, that they had a parade for Old Settlers.
That's, what they talk about, I see, in 1916, when Elder Yeagle was a member of Old Settlers Association. I know they're having trouble up at this grove, but he mentioned, hey, I'll offer you this grove for 5 years. And the Freeport paper used to have correspondence in every town. And they'd have like a correspondent from Cedarville, and they might write in Mr. and Mrs. Jim Barnwell went to Red Oak to visit Sharon's parents. They had things like that. Well, one thing they mentioned was, hey, this is really going to help Cedarville because we can do a lot of things in this grove. As you mentioned, showed movies. I talked about having the fair there in 19 for the 4-H fair. Apparently they had some 4th of July activities there. It wasn't just, it was the old, known as the Old Settlers Grove, but they did other things there too. Because it was just basically a tree, an area with trees and just an open area.
It's amazing.
Yeah. It was, it's hard to believe now.
Because they had carnivals there for a number of years too, the Ferris wheel and merry-go-round and.
And Butch Wagner, Tilda World, and things like that, yeah. They did things like that.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
Yeah, it really, it wasn't, everybody said by the 50s, it was kind of more of a Cedarville, Orangeville, Red Oak, Scioto Mills type thing. But still, it was, I'm sure there were other people, if you looked at the entertainment on some of these poster boards, people came from different towns, sang. In fact, late 58 or 59, they had a talent show. And how things have changed, the winner of that talent show got to go to a competition in the Legal Lions Fall Festival. They had like I'm assuming all the festivals around Cedarville had talent shows. The winners went to kind of a grand finale at the Legal Lions Festival in September. So they were doing different things. Things change. You know, it wasn't the same thing as what it was in 1890 or 1910. But as I think this editorial said, it was the same idea. Yeah, you had different things, but you got together and saw people you hadn't seen for a while and talked to them and had a little fun. And that was kind of the idea of being together. It was a good way to do it. Any other questions? Yes.
You know what? Well, I wasn't exactly sure when the highway went through, but I was told that my grandfather, my dad's dad, worked on the culvert came, and I thought I had a picture of it with the cement mixer or something. I'm not sure what that.
1930, they built the bridge.
Oh, they
29. So before that, you went up past the Jane Addams house, across the meadow, up behind that the house up there that was J. Weber Adams' house. I think it was a Judge Shaw who moved up from Mount Carroll. And then, of course, in the 70s and 80s, Bob and Jeanette Langlois owned it. The house is still there, and that's where the highway was.
You know, that reminds me. See, I'm not sure exactly when my grandfather, I don't know where I get the idea, it was 27 and 28. And then, of course, my grandfather told his kids, well, you know, working on the highway is harder than working on the farm, so he took his money out of the bank and bought a farm, like I said, 3 miles north Cedarville behind the rest stop. And then I was, every now and then, I look at I should say, the stuff in the corner of the house and that. Where in the world did we keep this, wooden crate and it had a lock on it? And somebody took the hinges off the back to get into it. I don't know why they didn't take the water cutter and cut the lock off. And it has information in there by, I never heard of this guy, this stuff in the house called W.H. Sean, like that old man, W.H. Anyhow, it's got records of how much the employees or the workers were paid from the 1920s or 30s or 40s or maybe 50s. I don't know where this comes
A
from.
lot less than what goes now. Any more questions? If not, don't forget the mother-daughter tea on September 6th, 1 to 3 o'clock. Also celebrate the 155th anniversary of the first Old Settlers. Are there any questions or comments?
And the refreshments next
Yeah,
door.
that's just what I was going to mention. Let's go eat.
Thank you.